My name is Caleb Sinn. I am the program manager with the Alberta Lake Management Society, or ALMS. And I just wanted to say thanks to Healthy Waters Lac La Bish for inviting me to speak. I wish I could have been there in person. However, maybe another time when the circumstances are a little bit better, and to be able to share a really neat project that we're doing out at Lac La Bish this year. So just a little background on ALMS. We exist to promote the understanding and comprehensive management of lakes and reservoirs and their watersheds. We are a nonprofit that was established formally in 1991, and we primarily undertake education. So events like this, we attend a lot. We also attend seminars and put on seminars. We deliver conferences, although the past 2 years we've been doing online webinar series, and we actually just wrapped up our annual webinar series this last month. We had some really great presentations through September. You can find all of those presentations on YouTube, and you can find the links on our website. We also collect and synthesize a lot of lake information. So we have multiple monitoring programs that are primarily citizen science based. So we work with volunteers and citizen scientists to gather data on lakes across the province. We also provide a scholarship every year to foster aquatic research in the province. We participate in local, provincial, and national programs, and we also provide expertise to other organizations concerned with lakes and lake management. So now I'm going to get into the main content of my presentation, and that's to present this satellite-derived algal bloom monitoring project that we have. And if you can see that this isn't your lake, but we were doing work on Lac La Bish this summer to be able to develop a similar tool like we have at Pigeon Lake. So the presentation is going to talk about how we began this program working at Pigeon Lake, what we've developed, and then I'm gonna finish it off kind of focusing on some of the field work that we did at Lac La Bish this last summer. So what is this effort? It's a primarily collaborative effort between a lab at the University of Alberta. It's Dr. Rolf Feinberg's lab, some scientists with Alberta Environment and Parks, the Pigeon Lake Watershed Association, the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute, or ABMI, and us. And our initial goal was to better understand the dynamics of cyanobacteria blooms at Pigeon Lake, because this idea first kind of came out of some technical advisory committee meetings with the PLWA. And at Pigeon Lake, just like Lac La Bish, they're really interested in their lake and to try to better understand what's going on, what sort of factors are leading to these blooms in particular, and what they may be able to do to sort of maybe curb some of the intensity of these blooms over time. So that's how the project began, but now it has expanded quite a bit recently to include a lot of other partners such as Lac La Bish County, the Wabamun Watershed Management Council, and the WPAC for Lesser Slave, the Lesser Slave Watershed Council. And the reason why we're bringing in a lot of other great partners is because our goals have kind of broadened to provide metrics for algal bloom activity in Alberta's lakes. To I'm actually getting a lot of feedback. Michael, do you think you can mute your computer? I think that might help some of the feedback. Okay, let's try that. Thanks. We also want to use lake samples to calibrate and validate this satellite data, provide near real-time information on lake pigment concentrations, and we use these pigment concentrations to learn more about the level of cyanobacteria in the water, and to investigate historical data across Alberta. So why use satellites? Why use them compared to some of the more traditional lake sampling techniques? Well, satellites are really great for approximating and capturing surface levels of algae and cyanobacteria. They provide a really great spatial idea of how the bloom is is progressing on the surface of a lake. If you think about an image, it's made up of pixels, and so the satellites will collect information from pixels all across the lake, and each one of those pixels gives us a point of data, where comparing to more traditional sampling approaches, in Alberta, you may combine water from 10 or 20 different locations across your lake, and just getting the satellite image in comparison of how different the bloom might be across the surface of the lake. And it also really allows us to compare some of the information that we're gathering from these monitoring programs with what people are seeing on the lake, because they're seeing exactly what's on the surface of the lake, and they're seeing it at multiple locations across the lake as well. So it really allows us to be able to compare what people are seeing on the lake, and to get really good information about that from a kind of a bird's eye view. And we can develop really interesting metrics to help describe how these blooms are operating as well. Satellites are really useful for their sample rate. So depending on the satellite that you're getting information from, it may be getting information from a lake in Alberta between every 1 and 5 days. Which is really, really great. Most of our monitoring programs here in Alberta, people are getting out to the lake once a month. So being able to get information every day or every 5 days, you can get a lot more information and describe the variation in what the bloom is doing throughout the summer. Using satellite imagery is low cost because there are a lot of there's a lot of satellite information that's freely accessible. So it's really great. And it's a passive sampling technique. So we don't actually need somebody on the water to be getting the information. However, I'll talk about later, we do need water samples to validate the imagery that we're using to track blooms. And satellite imagery actually has quite a long history of data. Some satellites, they go back to getting information from the 1980s. So there really is a large amount of data that you can use to explore some of these blooms in our lakes. And now I'm going to talk quickly about some of the limitations, because with any project, it's really great to understand what you can do really well and what things you recognize aren't as great and are limiting. And a big thing with satellite imagery, which we'll see later, from the field work that we did this summer, is that it's challenging because for this project, we need cloud-free days to get useful imagery. The technique of tracking lake blooms using satellite imagery is still fairly limited. It's been quite developed in the oceans, but as far as lakes, it's still fairly new. You need to have lake surface samples or validation samples to be able to understand if the satellite is actually representing the bloom accurately. We'll get to that later. Another limitation is that the satellite derived concentrations of algae pigments only represent surface levels, and certain species can actually grow a lot deeper in the water column. So it's useful to understand that the satellites will only really estimate the very surface of the water and may not capture algae growth at lower depths, which can occur. Right now, the pigment that we really are focusing on is chlorophyll A, and chlorophyll A is a proxy for all cyanobacterial and algae growth in lakes. So it's really widely used to capture the amounts of cyanobacteria and algae in the water, but it does approximate both cyanobacteria and other forms of algae. And one of our goals in this project is to develop a tool that can specifically characterize cyanobacteria using cyanobacteria specific pigments, and that is still kind of a ways off, but I think we'll get there. And the last thing I want to get to about limitations is that this sort of sampling approach does not replace traditional lake sampling, because it doesn't capture a lot of really important parameters from lakes, such as nutrient parameters, which we learned a lot about their importance and a lot of other parameters as well. But it really does complement this standard lake sampling that happens in our lakes. Okay, so now kind of moving on to the steps of the project. So the first steps were to first use models that exist already to start to characterize some of these chlorophyll A concentrations at Pigeon Lake using 2 satellites. So the 2 satellites that we use, one is called Sentinel-3, one is called Sentinel-2. They both provide similar information, but Sentinel-3, the one on the top there, it flies over Alberta every single day, so you can get those daily images from our lakes, but the pixel size is much larger, so the image that we get is much grainier. But Sentinel-2, on the other hand, it doesn't fly over as often, but the images that it provides have much better spatial resolution and much smaller pixel sizes, so you can get much clearer imagery, and the satellite's probably more suitable for smaller lakes in the province. So the ABMI, who really have the geospatial expertise to do this kind of work, did this first step to characterize what chlorophyll A at Pigeon Lake would look like before actually getting validation samples. And the models that they used were based on lakes in Ohio and Estonia. And one of the concerns is that these models that they were using wouldn't necessarily represent Pigeon Lake all that well. So the next step was to validate this sort of imagery using samples from Pigeon Lake. So in the summer of 2020, we worked with the Pigeon Lake Watershed Association to collect surface samples on the same day that the satellites were flying over Pigeon Lake. So the sampling that occurred involved going to 20 sites across Pigeon Lake and getting samples where we could get the actual concentration of chlorophyll A and other pigments. We also collected a sample to identify which species of algae and cyanobacteria are growing in those locations. And then other data was collected as well, such as Secchi depth or water clarity, water depth, wave height, and then the GPS location was the most important piece of information that was collected along with the chlorophyll sample, so that we could identify which pixel in the image that the satellite collected corresponded to the location where the sample was collected. So this happened 5 times across the summer in 2020. And the reason for that was to capture the chlorophyll levels and the cyanobacteria levels throughout the whole summer, because we know that in June, levels are fairly low, and then they start to ramp up and kind of peak in August and then kind of persist into September. So we wanted to get that range of cyanobacteria levels. And we were able to get lots of good sampling dates last year. And yeah, you can see all of the dates there, and you can even see how much greener the lake actually got by the August sampling event and how it persisted into September. So then from that sampling, we were able to get a Pigeon Lake specific model to be able to characterize the chlorophyll A in the surface of the lake, and then to actually make a tool where people could visit this website and be able to interact with this information. And I'm going to do a demo of the tool just in a second. But currently, this tool, this website, visualizes data from Pigeon Lake from 2017 and to 2020. And 2021 is also in there, but it needs a bit of work yet to factor out some of the cloud interferences. So this tool is still under development. It's not publicly available yet, but that is the goal. We want anybody to be able to interact with this tool to learn more about how the bloom in their lake is changing throughout the season and between years. And another really neat aspect of the tool is that it's near real time, and that the imagery that's collected by the satellite in the few days after, about 1 day, sometimes it's a little bit longer, that information is actually uploaded to the internet, and then so it's what we call a near real-time tool, which is really neat. It's not something that you have to wait until the winter to look at, but a couple days after the image is collected, you can see what the surface chlorophyll levels were on your lake. So I'm just going to do a quick demo. So I'll just get out of presentation, go to my browser, and if you can see this, okay, you can see this is a Google Map image of Pigeon Lake. And on the left-hand panel here, you have an area where you can select the dates that you're curious about. And I've already uploaded all of 2020. You can either select whether you want to look at chlorophyll A values or the true color of the lake. And then you can select whether you want to look at the Sentinel-2 satellite, the one that doesn't go over quite as often, but has much better pixel resolution, or Sentinel-3, the one that goes over every single day, but isn't quite as sharp. So then you can load that up. And then on the bottom left, we have the color ramp for the level of chlorophyll. So the more purple, blue levels are lower. And then once it gets to those greens and yellow, that's when the chlorophyll is getting quite high. And you can kind of imagine that the yellow levels would be surface scum type levels of cyanobacteria. Now on the top, you can actually use that bar to navigate between the dates. So I'm gonna go through 2020 and we're gonna see what it looked like for Pigeon Lake. So we're in June right now. The levels are really low for chlorophyll, so the lake is not blooming. The water is quite clear. And then once we're getting into July, this is July 10th, you can kind of see some yellow-green levels coming up there. So now the cyanobacteria is starting to grow a bit more. And as we get into later July, it looks pretty similar. But then once we get into August here, we're starting to see some of those yellow levels, and we can see that they're highest kind of in that northwest area of the lake, and this is the image that kind of shows the worst day that we captured using the satellite imagery, I guess, the highest levels of chlorophyll. And like I said, those yellow levels, that would be kind of like a surface scum. And then once we get into further in August, we can see that the bloom has kind of moved across the whole lake, and now is kind of moving around depending on the winds. And then as we get into September and October, the levels sort of go away a little bit as temperatures go down and the lake starts to mix. So that's kind of a demo of how users can interact with the tool. And this graph on the right actually shows what the average level for the whole lake is for chlorophyll. So it kind of shows the progression of the average, the bloom across the whole lake through the season, where July, June, it was pretty low. And then once we got into August, it kind of got up into that 40 microgram per liter higher level of chlorophyll range, and then came back down in September. So now I'm going to go back to my presentation. And one really neat thing about that figure is when you load up the information for all the years, you can actually compare how the blooms progressed between the years. So the one that we were just looking at, 2020, is this blue one, where we can see actually higher levels of chlorophyll occurred a little bit earlier relative to some of the other years. And we know relative to some of the other years, such as compared to 2018, which is red, or 2019, which is yellow, that 2020 and 2018 were, that 2020 actually had a bit higher levels of chlorophyll, and the bloom maybe was a bit worse. So it's a really great way of being able to capture some of these yearly variation in blooms. Okay, so that work was all kind of done last winter to develop the tool. It's still ongoing, but now the project is developing further. And these are the three main things that we're kind of working on. The first is to continue to develop that visualization, that website, to be able to include additional metrics to help us understand and communicate some of the different dynamics of these blooms, and to kind of improve the aesthetics, just the way the website looks, so that people can understand and interact with things and have a bit more knowledge as to what everything means. We want to explore additional data that the project has collected. We want to see maybe which cyanobacteria species are driving some of these blooms, and to see if we can use other pigments as well to kind of understand whether the relationship between the levels of cyanobacteria and potentially other algal species in these lakes. And the last one is we want to validate the tool and to further develop our understanding of cyanobacteria dynamics and support lake management by developing these same tools at other lakes in Alberta. And one way to validate this pigeon tool is to do the same approach at other lakes in the province. And before I get there, I'm gonna just one of our big inspirations is the EO Lake Watch program that the federal government has through the Environment Climate Change Canada. Yeah, so they have this same approach for Lake Winnipeg, Lake of the Woods, and Lake Erie, where you can see near real time what the chlorophyll levels are and to see how the blooms at these lakes are progressing. So we really like how this tool explores historical data and how it integrates other metrics of understanding how these blooms are developing, the extent of the bloom, how large it is, and even other metrics such as how intense and how severe. And exploring these additional metrics really help us understand how the blooms might be changing through a single season, but also between seasons. Another really great thing that we like about this program is I actually get emails quite often that where they actually provide near real-time progress of these blooms. So on the bottom right here, I got this email not too long ago for Lake of the Woods, and it shows some really interesting information. This graph kind of shows how the bloom this year compares to past blooms. That black line is the average of the bloom between average level of chlorophyll, or sorry, the extent of the bloom from 2002 and 2020. And you can see the red line, which is this year, it's a little bit lower than that average. And then the gray kind of shows the range in terms of percentiles of the bloom. So we really like that approach, and it may be something that this project will pursue as well, to be able to send email updates to anybody who has signed up. Okay, now I'm going to get into some of the work that we did at Lac La Bish this summer. So like I said, one of the goals of this project is to validate this approach by doing it at more lakes and to support other lakes in their efforts of lake management and lake understanding. So there were 3 lakes that we worked at this last summer, Lac La Bish, Wabamun Lake, and Lesser Slave Lake. And we like these lakes because they are relatively larger lakes in terms of lake sizes in Alberta. They have differing cyanobacteria and algae communities between them, and they're all very popular recreational lakes with differing histories of blooms from this last summer as well. So at Lac La Bish, we were really happy to work with Lac La Bish County and some of their summer staff. So we sent them all of the materials they needed to do this work, and we coordinated with them to know which days to actually go out and do the sampling. So we ended up selecting sites at 20 sites per each basin, and we wanted to get multiple sampling events over the summer, ideally 3 for each basin. But as you'll see later, there were some difficulties just with the weather conditions that we had this summer. And the idea was to time the sampling with the Sentinel-2 satellite, which goes over every 3 to 5 days, and then Sentinel-3 goes over every day. So those were the 2 satellites that we're looking to validate. So these are some of the images that were captured on the days that sampling occurred. That first June image, not all the imagery has been uploaded, but the field staff for Lac La Bish County sampled both basins that day. So it was a beautiful day, no cloud cover. And then the next time we were able to get we attempted to do some field work do the sampling was August 24th, which we had a high confidence that it wasn't going to be cloud cover, but cloud cover is really difficult to forecast, and some sites will be useful in that. And that was an East Basin sampling event. And then on August 29th, we had a beautiful day. The Lac La Bish County summer staff sampled the West Basin on August 29th. And you can even just see the difference in the color of the lake between June 27th and August 29th. There's been quite an increase in chlorophyll levels and cyanobacteria between those dates. And like I mentioned, there's another satellite that we were validating as well. And we actually were able to do a sampling event in 2020 on the East Basin. So that's why I provided this image, because we're able to use that data from 2020 as well. And then the same dates, June 27th, August 24th, and August 29th, we did the field work as well. And even if you compare August 2020 to August 2021, although the image, there may be some smoke interference in the 29th image there. It does appear that even just looking at these images, that the bloom didn't seem to be quite as severe at Lac La Bish this last summer compared to 2020. All right, so now, like I said, we had some challenges, and like I mentioned earlier, there are some limitations with this type of work. And the first one is we can only really do the sampling during safe conditions. So I shared that August 9th image because it shows perfectly clear conditions, but it was really windy that day. I can remember. And yeah, so it's one of the challenges with this field work is that you need to have all of these weather conditions agree before it makes sense to do the sampling. So we had challenges with wind this year, and of course with such a large lake we have to be really careful. There were some limitations with clouds. Lots of times it was looking like it was going to be good to do the sampling, and then the clouds rolled in. And then of course we had a lot of smoke this summer as well. And you can see from that August 1st image on the bottom right that if we're doing sampling on a day like this, the samples aren't going to be as useful because there are going to be some interferences with the smoke that's in the lake. And then it's always challenging to do the logistics in terms of being able to process the samples quickly, but we did really well. We really happy to work with Lac La Bish County to work out all the kinks. And I think we're still looking to do one more sampling event this year. If the weather holds out, if we can get one more clear, calm day, we're hoping to get another sampling event on the East Basin. And then other project next steps in regards to Lac La Bish in particular is all of the Lac La Bish samples are going to be processed at the U of A this fall and winter. And then hopefully we'll be able to actually validate a model for Lac La Bish and then develop a visualization tool like we did at Pigeon Lake for Lac La Bish so that we can start to learn more about how the blooms have, how they've been at Lac La Bish in the past number of years to support a lot of your great management efforts at the lake. So, and that's all I have. So I'd be happy to take any questions that anybody in the room has or anybody else online. And you'll have to unmute yourself, Michael.
I have a question, Caleb, if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Looking at 1950, some of the graphs of the algal bloom seem to spike and start to really grow right then in 1950 and on. Is there some event in your mind that happened then?
That's the 50s, you said?
1950, yes.
Are you, is that information from the sediments?
Typically, that was on your board there, 1950.
Oh, I can't hear that now.
Caleb, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Brian. Yep.
Okay. So carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus all changed drastically in 1950.
carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus in 1950.
The levels of carbon and phosphorus.
They all changed drastically in Lac La Bish Lake in that year. And then changed in turn. Yes.
Without kind of seeing, I guess the information and looking at some of the progressions over time, I can't make any confident suggestions as to why that can happen. But I think as far as thinking about chlorophyll levels and blooms, some of the reasons why they could go really high in such short periods of time could be really specific weather conditions. We know year to year that generally like really hot, calm conditions really favor blooms. But as far as some of the nutrient dynamics as well, I'd have to look at some of the other information as well to really like comment confidently as to what may have happened in the 50s. But there could be a number of factors for that as well. It could be surrounding land use changes or point sources at that time, big erosion. But I can't say for sure without knowing some other information to give some context.
So Caleb, is this a model? Is this something that could be easily kind of done and then applied to like most recreational lakes in Alberta? Relatively easy once you have the model validated?
That's really the hope, actually, and that's why we wanted to do this approach at other lakes in 2021, because if we compare how the models differ between Pigeon Lake and Lac La Bish and Wabamun and see that, you know, the variation isn't that large, it means to us possibly that we could apply this model to, like you said, any lake in the province so that we wouldn't have to do that field work before developing a model. So that's really the hope. And that's something that our geospatial collaborator at the ABMI is going to be investigating moving forward, because yes, our hope is that ideally we can have this tool that we could apply to any lake in the province and to support management efforts at any of these lakes without necessarily doing this really intensive field work.
Any other questions?
Well, on there and back.
Yeah, the satellite imagery is a great tool, and you do sampling to verify and sort of quantify a number of the imagery. But does the algae, does the depth, does the concentration or the depth of the algae bloom, does that have any effect on it, or is just the surface imaging a pretty good indicator?
Could you hear that, Caleb?
Can you relay it? I heard snippets of it, but not the whole thing.
Yeah, it was relating, the question was relating to what you had in your presentation about surface as opposed to at lake depths, and how much of a factor is that? How does that come into play? Yeah,
we've thought about that a lot, because being on the lakes, I know that in certain situations, you know, cyanobacteria are really well adapted to moving themselves in the water column. And actually in really, really warm days, they'll go a little bit lower in the water column. Not a lot, but kind of talking to our geospatial collaborator at the ABMI, kind of like understanding how deep these satellites can actually visualize. It's probably within like about a meter, half a meter, depending on the lake clarity, but that it really only, this approach really only represents the surface, and that in other really unique systems that we see in the province where there actually are cyanobacterial blooms that happen at 3 or 4 meters depth, depending on the system, this sort of approach won't be able to capture those types of blooms, but those are relatively rare in the province. But surface blooms like we see in Lac La Bish and Pigeon Lake and other lakes in the province it really only is adequate for near surface levels of chlorophyll. I hope that answers the question. Feel free to elaborate if I didn't address what you were really curious about.
Yeah, I think that's good. Thanks, Caleb.
Any other questions for Caleb? Well, thank you so much, Caleb, for presenting for us. I really appreciate that. Yeah, hopefully we'll hear more once we find out about the information from 2021 and how that validates. And yeah, I can't wait to hear more about that.
Excited to share it with you once it's ready.
Yeah, excellent.
How would we make sure we hear about it? Will you contact us, or will it be posted on ALMS's website, or will there be an email or something?
Sorry, can you say that again? I think my internet might have cut out quick. Can you say that again?
I was just wondering how we'll hear about that. Will it be on the ALMS website, or will you send out an email, or?
We will be advertising the tools once they are publicly available, but I'm working really closely with Randy at Lac La Bish County as well to do all the field work. So I'm sure once it's ready, I will share it with her, and she can also share it with your group. So we will definitely make sure that once the tool is developed for the lake, that there'll be multiple ways I'm sure you'll hear about it, and we'll keep presenting on it as well, because it's going to be really interesting to see how these levels, how the tool looks for different lakes in the province. So you'll definitely hear about it once it's ready.
Great. Sounds good. Oh, there's one other question.
Yeah, sorry. What kind of work do you get your volunteers to do? Do they do sampling, like is that a volunteer position, or is it hired?
Could you hear the question?
Can you say it again, Brian?
It was with regards to the volunteers that you arrange for, and what kind of work do they do, and is it voluntary or hired?
So for this project in particular, depending on the lake, we had different partners that we worked with to support the field work. So Lac La Bish County, they had summer staff that were able to do the sampling work. Alberta Environment and Parks was able to support the summer work that we did, or this field work that we did for this program at Lesser Slave Lake. But for Pigeon Lake and for Wabamun, we were working with volunteers in the stewardship groups there to do the sampling. So ALM staff actually went out to do that. But we have other programs as well, other lake monitoring programs. Our Lake Watch program is a program that we've been doing for 25 years, and volunteers participate in that program by working with our hired technicians and sampling a lake. The volunteers lake 4 times throughout the season. And then we have another lake monitoring program that I would say is our most citizen science type program. It's called Lake Keepers, and it runs through the summer as well as in the winter. And we actually have these lake sampling kits that we send to these volunteers, and they do the sampling themselves. For the summer, they have to do it 3 times throughout the summer season. And then in the winter, there's a lot more flexibility, and the volunteers can go to whatever location they want on their lake of interest, and they can go up to 4 times throughout the season, just because of the amount of kits that we have. So if you're curious in doing some sampling, I know that Lac La Bish, the summer sampling is done through Lac La Bish County, but we are looking for more volunteers to participate in our winter program. And if you are interested in going out in the winter, if you're going to be going ice fishing anyways, definitely get in touch with us, and we can set you up with this kit, and you can take some samples while you're doing your ice fishing. So yeah, I think I had it on my last slide. I'll share my screen again so you can see it. But if you're curious about participating in some of our monitoring programs, you can email me at programs@alms.ca.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, great, thank you.
And Caleb, might you be interested in getting volunteers to sample some other lakes in the area?
Yeah, it's in some lakes. Definitely email me, and we'll find the right program for your kind of lake. And the lake might be sampled by the county already, because they sample a number of lakes every year. But if it isn't, or if you know you want to do it in the winter, we're definitely open to talking about what sort of sampling you want to do and what program might be the best for that. So we do work at any lake in the province, really. We just try to find the right program to fit that lake.
Caleb, if I followed I'm aware of the Lake Watch program. I know you've
Yep.
been doing that for quite a few years. Is that one that you kind of have a certain set of lakes each summer that get surveyed? And so if someone wants to volunteer, it would have to be one of those lakes. But the other program you mentioned, where you send out a kit, that can be a lake chosen by the volunteer. Did I follow that correctly?
Yeah, actually for both of the programs, we select the lakes based off of the volunteer outreach. You know, like I'm getting emails kind of throughout the year. People are saying, hey, I'm at Pine Lake. I know that our lake hasn't been sampled since 2016. I would love to do another sampling event. And that lake suits the Lake Watch program really well because it's relatively close to the city. It has a long history of sampling, the type of sampling that the Lake Watch program is, which is it's the provincial standard for lake sampling, which the province has been doing since the 80s. So we know that the best program for Pine Lake is probably this Lake Watch program. But you know, our Lake Keepers program for the summer is really well set up for lakes that are a bit more isolated from the city. So a lot of lakes in the Peace River or the Peace region actually are sampled through the Lake Keepers program because it's just logistically challenging for our techs to go all the way up there 4 times through a season. And lots of those lakes don't necessarily have the history of sampling. So they are really well suited to this Lake Keeper program because of their location and the history of their sampling. So, so to kind of answer your question, Brian, all of our programs are kind of driven by volunteer desire yeah, we just like compile a list of requests, and then we do have a set number of lakes that we do every year based off of a contract that we have with the government surrounding lakes that are in provincial parks. But otherwise, all of the lakes that we sample are based off of volunteer outreach or other contracts we have with lake stewardship groups.
Great, thanks. And I noticed you mentioned, I'm aware of this too, that there are a certain number that Lac La Bish County always surveys as well each year. And I know Randy is on the call. She could probably provide people with that list of lakes. I don't know, Randy, if you want to speak on that briefly, but feel free to chip in if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. We do sample Lac La Bish Lake, Eleanor Lake, Fork Lake, and Beaver Lake every year. So we do write up annual reports for each one of those lakes as well. So those are available for anyone if they'd like to take a look at those as well.
That's on the county website, right?
And they are available on the county website as well, yes.
Perfect. Yep, thank you. Any follow-up questions on any of that? I think that was a great question because it is something that might occur to anyone in the county. Hey, how can I help? So, yeah, really good.
All right, well, we should probably wrap this up so that we do have another presentation this evening. So again, thank you so much, Caleb. And yeah, hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Caleb.
Thank you, Caleb.
All right, I'm gonna switch over to the other presentation now. Where is that thing? Here it is.
Feel free to grab a bite of food over there, like some donuts. And I know it's getting a little late if people don't want to stay for the second one. I understand, but he did do that for us.
They recorded it for us, huh?
Oh,
Yeah.
how long is this?
It is
Well, I don't see it.
26 minutes or so.
All
All right, so for our online people, oh, let's take that off.
Yeah, I will unmute over here. Where's my Zoom? Yeah.
All right, so for the sake of our recording, I'm gonna play this off of my computer and Brian's gonna play it off of his computer for the sake of showing it on the screen. So I'm gonna share my screen now to our other one.
Thanks for coming, folks.
All right.
Do you want to introduce
I'll let her do it herself. Yeah.
Just go ahead.
Yeah, just go ahead and I'm going to share my screen this way. Okay. All right, here's the other presentation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel, and I work for LICA out of Bonnyville. I'm so honored to be here with you on Treaty 6 territory. I am also extremely apologetic that I could not attend live. As you're listening to this, I'm probably doing a presentation at our AGM. But thank you so much for taking the time to come to these wonderful open houses anyway, as they're hosted by Healthy Waters Lac La Bish. Your support is really what is making our stewardship possible, so thank you. This evening, we're going to focus on water governance in Alberta. So how water is managed, who are the major players doing that management? And we will take a special look at WPACs, that's where the title comes from, what WPACs do for you. And that's because that is what LICA is, we're a WPAC. We also want to share with you the ways that we can help you improve environmental sustainability on your land. So including some funding opportunities as well. Stay tuned for that. So just to get us started, a little bit about our organization. So LICA is a community-based not-for-profit association that is a synergy group, meaning we bring stakeholders together to discuss energy and development in our area. We're the Watershed Planning and Advisory Council, or WPAC, for the Beaver River Watershed. We're going to get into that in a little bit. And we're an airshed zone. And as such, we operate a really impressive air quality monitoring network in our region. So LICA focuses on environmental monitoring, environmental management, and community education and outreach. That's what I do as the education and outreach coordinator. Our vision, mission, and values are really what guides our work and gives you a better sense of our organizational goals. So I'll just quickly read those to you. So our vision, the environment in the LICA region is ecologically healthy and sustainable. Our mission, LICA collects, shares, and acts upon data, traditional knowledge, and information relevant to the environment. And this will be achieved through scientific study, community engagement, and meaningful partnerships. And finally, our values. So we connect stakeholders and promote community involvement. We provide timely, defensible, and accessible data. We educate the community advocating for environmental stewardship, and we responsibly manage our resources to achieve our vision and our mission. So here's just a quick outline of what we're going to cover today. Like I said, we're going to speak about water governance, and we're going to be paying special attention to the Water Act and the Water for Life strategy. We'll then move on to how this actually gets done in real life, how the strategies are actually implemented and achieved through the WPACs and our partners, and we'll save funding and educational opportunities that you can take part in for last. So there's just a couple of things I wanted to bring to the forefront as we're talking about water as a natural resource. Just some things to keep in mind. So all life depends on water. We all need it to survive. Human bodies are between 60 to 70% water, depending on your age, gender, what scientist you're asking. Plants also need water, and our wildlife needs water as well. So it's really essential to our quality of life that we have dependable quality water available. At the same time, water is also necessary for our highly developed society to function. So we need water in our homes for them to be livable. Water is necessary for industry to extract oil and gas, for example, or for fisheries, or for any other sector that's employing us and our neighbors. So again, our quality of life is only as good as the quality and the quantity of our fresh water. Next, water is a finite resource. So we're really fortunate to live in such a water-rich country. Canada is holding more than 1/5 of the world's fresh water. And when we look at that number, we understand why we don't think too hard about how much water we're using every day because we're surrounded by it. That being said, we only get so much rain every year. We only get so much snow melt, glacier melt, etc. And if we were to give out water licenses to everyone who asked for one, we would deplete our water supply very, very quickly. On top of that, treating the wastewater that comes out of that scenario also becomes very expensive very quickly. So it's really best to think about water as a finite resource that needs judicious management and very involved management, as opposed to a renewable. And then to build on that point, we see a lot of disparity about where our water supply is located and where demand is located. So 80% of the water supply is in the north, and 80% of the water demand is actually in the south. Southern Alberta really struggles with drought during the summer months. I'm sure you all know that. It's mainly due to geography, climate, natural hydrological factors, so aka quote unquote natural factors, but that doesn't really alleviate the strain on families, on agriculture, on industry when the water does become scarce. So while we live in the aptly named Lakeland, it's important to keep in mind that this really is not the reality across the province. Next, with climate change, that point goes for double. Our water resources are going to become very challenged in the coming years, and our allocation is going to become a lot more difficult to do. And then lastly, I just want to give you some context about where our water is allocated in Alberta. So that's the graph. The vast majority of it is allocated to irrigation. That's followed by cooling, used in commercial power plants. Then the third is municipal water supply. So irrigation, cooling, and then municipal water supply are our biggest allocations. You'll also notice that we mainly pull surface water. That's about 97% of all of our water needs. And we really don't pull a whole lot from groundwater. It's only making up about 3% of our water needs. So there's just some context around water in Alberta that you can rely on as we move through the presentation. So let's get into it. Water governance in Alberta. So starting off, let's talk about the different legislation that affects water. So there's 9 different acts up on the screen. Some are provincial, some are federal, and it's a lot to sift through. And really, these are just the most relevant pieces of legislation. It's not all of the legislation that mentions water. So starting with provincial legislation directly regulates water and land use in Alberta. These things, water and land use, they really go hand in hand because there's not a single land use that doesn't affect the surrounding water bodies. So you really have to legislate things on them together. So moving through these different acts, the Land Stewardship Act, this gives the government the tools to enact the land use framework. So the land use framework is the government's approach to managing public and private lands and natural resources to achieve long-term economic, environmental, and social goals. So essentially, this is kind of our long-term development plan for the province. Following that, we have EPA, the Environmental Protection and Enhancement Act. This one allows the government to develop regulations, standards, guidelines, and ambient objectives to protect Alberta's land, air, and water. And it also gives the power to the government to perform environmental assessments, environmental impact assessments on developments of a certain size and a certain type that are listed in the Act. These are called designated activities. Next, we have the Public Lands Act. This one regulates the allocation, the transfer, and the sale of public land. It also regulates how public lands can be used. This is actually particularly important in a water context because it does regulate shorelines and riverbeds. So the land that's like directly adjacent to a water body or the bottom of an ephemeral water body, that's all provincial land. Then lastly, we have the Water Act. This is the most direct legislation affecting water in the province. We'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. Additionally, there is a couple pieces of federal legislation to consider. So firstly, the Fisheries Act, Migratory Birds Convention Act, Species at Risk Act, the Navigable Waters Protection Act. All of these give federal jurisdiction to these specific topics. So they're pretty self-explanatory. And these acts also apply whether or not they're on federal land. So we do have to follow them, whether or not we are in a national park, on reserve, etc. Next, we have the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. This is analogous to a PIA, but it's at the federal level. So it gives the federal government environmental assessment power over certain designated activities. So moving into the most important one, the Water Act. So how did this piece of legislation evolve? The first law passed in this country regulating water was the Northwest Irrigation Act of 1894. So that's a federal piece of legislation. And it gave the Dominion of Canada control over the surface water throughout the country and the ability to allocate it. In 1930, jurisdiction of the natural resources were devolved to the provinces, that sort of separation of powers. So Alberta created its own water legislation, the Water Resources Act, in 1931. They then passed another law in 1953, that's the Groundwater Control Act. Remember that the laws above were only dealing with surface water, so an additional act was necessary to control groundwater. And then in 1962, the Water Resources Act was amended to include groundwater. And then we get to the Water Act, 1999. It's been amended a few times since then, but the core legislation essentially remains the same. So the Water Act governs water licenses and approvals, aka water use in the province, water resource planning, and it implements standards for water and wastewater systems. And the goal of the Act is really to promote conservation and the wise allocation and use of water. So that's a direct quote. Other goals are to promote economic growth and sustainability by making sure our water resources are dependable and to protect existing water rights as well. So how does this play out? What are the principles of the Act? Well, the Act says that the Crown owns all the water in the province, even on private land, and in order to use that water, you need a license. Obviously, you aren't carrying around a water license in your wallet. This is because your municipal government is holding a license for all of its residents and manages the water use at a municipal level. And that's true for about 90% of Albertans. Households that are not hooked up to municipal water are allowed to withdraw up to 1,250 cubic meters of water a year without a license. And then anything else, any sort of industrial, agricultural, commercial water use needs a water license in order to divert that water out of our water bodies. The Act works on the principle of first in time, first in right, meaning that if a water shortage conflict arises, the user holding the oldest license gets seniority. Exceptions to this, so household use takes top priority no matter what. If a water license is going to divert your household water, that's not acceptable. Next, traditional agricultural users are also protected, but this is a very small group of people who had to have been diverting water prior to 1999 when the Water Act came into effect, and they had to have registered their farm before 2003. And there's also exceptions, for example, for water for firefighting. These kind of emergency uses, those also take priority over water license allocations. So the Act allows users to appeal decisions made by AEP under the Water Act. So that goes for approvals, licenses, preliminary certificates, amendments, fines, penalties, enforcement orders. You can appeal all of those decisions to the Environmental Appeals Board if you are affected by a water decision. And water management plans can also be regulated by the province. So this is what happened in the South Saskatchewan River Basin with their water management plan, for example. So the Water for Life strategy. So Water for Life is the Government of Alberta's comprehensive water management policy. And this was set in 2003 after some really extensive public consultation, and then it was renewed in 2008. So it was determined that the province really needed an overarching response to these devastating multi-year droughts that happened in the really late 90s, early 2000s. So they did a lot of that consultation process, and Water for Life was born out of those consultations. So thinking about that, how is this different than the Water Act? So the Water Act gives the province ownership of the water and the right to allocate it, whereas the Water for Life strategy sets out the government's management goals and helps guide ministries when they are doing work that affects water. So really they're two kind of separate things. One is legislation giving the government powers, and one is kind of this guiding framework for water management. So the renewal of the strategy in 2008 set a 10-year plan to achieve short, medium, and long-term goals. And a lot of these goals have been met. And the Alberta Water Council, is working to develop a new Water for Life action plan for 2024 that realigns our goals with the needs of the province. So the Water for Life strategy has three main goals. The first being safe, secure drinking water, the second being healthy aquatic ecosystems, and the third being a reliable quality water supply for a sustainable economy. And it also has three directions. So knowledge and research, partnerships, and water conservation. So the directions, these are setting out the way to achieve these goals. They're the direction that all of our water partners are following in order to achieve the three goals of safe, secure drinking water, healthy aquatic ecosystems, and reliable quality water supplies. The top picture here shows a timeline of how the Water for Life strategy has progressed since implementation. So starting with the implementation in 2003, the Water Council, Alberta Water Council, was established in 2004. Policy was renewed in 2008. A new action plan was released in 2009. And then the government started doing some more consultation work to develop some new plans and new strategies 2013, and a comprehensive review was released again in 2014. And then on this right side picture here, the diagram, this shows the goals, so safe, secure drinking water, healthy aquatic ecosystems, reliable quality water supplies, along with some steps down here to achieve them, some targets. And I really like this picture because it shows how all of the goals are overlapping and how they all interconnect to achieve this healthy, secure, reliable water source. So that's kind of the gist of how water is governed by the province. And now we're going to move into what is a WPAC, who are our partners, how are we actually achieving these things on the ground. So on the last slide, I spoke about the 3 directions for Water for Life, one of which being partnerships. So the strategy sets out 3 different kinds of partnerships, very specific types of partnerships that are integral to achieving the 3 main goals of safe drinking water, healthy aquatic ecosystems, and reliable water for economic sustainability. So each partnership type focuses on a different level of jurisdiction, from very broad to very local. So at the provincial jurisdiction level, we have the Alberta Water Council. This was formed in 2004 and it provides policy advice to the government and oversees implementation of Water for Life. So they're making sure that those targets are being achieved, and they're acting kind of like that watchdog. And then on the very local scale, we have watershed stewardship groups. That's like Healthy Waters, Moose Lake Management Society, Muriel Lake Basin Management Society, things of that nature. Then in the middle, we have WPACs, which are operating on the watershed level. And you can see the different WPACs that are in our province on the map on the right-hand side of the page. So WPACs are independent nonprofit organizations. This brings a lot of credibility to the work that we do because we're not beholden to the government or to industry when we report our findings. So if we do monitoring and report on that monitoring, or if we gather information from the different WSGs in our area and bring all of that together, we're not beholden to the government or the industry side. And that makes our work very independent. So WPACs are the main mechanism for bringing multi-sectoral stakeholders together at the watershed level to share resources, expertise, and knowledge. So we're bringing together municipalities, the provincial and the federal government, industry, agriculture, First Nations, community members, environmental nonprofit groups. We're bringing them all together to talk about the watershed and to make a plan moving forward. WPACs develop local solutions so we get better management of our watershed, and we also act as an incubator for ideas and strategies to improve watershed management. And then lastly, because we act as that middleman, we're getting information from the local and from the provincial side. We can leverage those resources to accomplish more together than can be done individually. And then lastly, one of the big things that WPACs do is we create these integrated watershed management plans. So again, bringing all of those stakeholders to the table to hammer out a plan for the watershed management that everybody can agree to and abide by. So what are the responsibilities of the WPACs? So one, we act as conveners and collaborators. We bring stakeholders together from different sectors to get their input on what we're doing. We also develop those watershed management plans that I was talking about. We advise on policy. Thirdly, we do a lot of monitoring. We do a lot of assessment and reporting on the health of our watershed. And we also deliver education and literacy programs to different audiences. So children, adults, in the classroom or in the community. We're going to where the people are. And then what does that mean? What does that all mean put together? Well, we kind of act like a hub for the environmental community, the water community. We're bringing that kind of on the ground knowledge from our watershed stewardship groups. We're sharing it with all of our partners. And we're also offering our knowledge and our support to them. And then we're reporting on that state of the watershed with the input from all of the different sources. So how does that all get achieved? Well, like I said, we work collaboratively with our partners and our stakeholders. We bring everybody to the table and reach out to everybody who might be having an impact on the water to get their perspectives. And we seek consensus on land, water, resource management strategies to support the shared achievement of our shared environmental, social, economic goals and our outcomes. So by seeking consensus, we don't just ask for a 50% plus one. majority understanding of our management plan, we really work to get everybody on board so that they can implement the management plan and feel good about it and feel like they contributed. We also work on a biased, balanced approach. So we work to fix the problems. We don't assign blame. What we do is we just focus on the problem and finding a solution to it, whether or not there's a very fixed cause for some of these problems. That's not our responsibility. We're here to fix the problem and create solutions. And then lastly, we provide science-based decision support tools for decision makers. So we can really dig into the science. We have that expertise available to us to give to the public, to give to our partners, to help them make scientifically sound decisions. So now that we've talked about what a WPAC is, what we're doing, we want to give you some opportunities. So let's go through some of those. So the funding opportunities on the screen here, these are for landowners and community groups that want to make a significant change in the environment. These applications can kind of be difficult to navigate if you don't have that background. And so we are more than happy to offer application support to you to get funding to make sustainability improvements on your land. This is just a handful of the funding opportunities that I know of. I'm sure there are more, but this really is there is a lot of opportunity out there and incentive to green your property. So moving through a couple of these, the Green Acreages project funding for property owners, we've done a lot of work with this. So if you have an acreage, a hobby farm, a recreational property, this is a really great funding opportunity for you. Watershed stewardship grants, those are from the Land Stewardship Center, and those are for community groups. We've had watershed stewardship groups in the past apply for funding to implement COLB, some of our campaigns. Next, we have our environmental farm plans. So if you enact an environmental farm plan, you become eligible for Canadian Agricultural Partnership funding, but you do need that farm plan to be eligible for it. And we can help you work through that process as well, or point you in the right direction to people who have completed them in the past. And then lastly, we have this kind of Ducks Unlimited funding. They do some revolving land and restoring wetland programs where they will give you money to put a conservation easement on your property, or do some kind of revolving your pasture, your grazing animals. So that's another really great opportunity, and to restore your wetlands as well. And then lastly, we have a lot of educational opportunities for you. That's my job. I offer educational opportunities to the public. And we have so many resources on our website. We have a lot of our data. We have to share it all. So that's all publicly published. If you ever have a question about the environmental history of a place or how it's currently doing, you can look into our data for that. We also teach workshops, or we invite experts to teach workshops and share their expertise as well. We also do a lot of water monitoring with our partners, and there is so much opportunity to learn how to do that every field season. So if you want to come out with us and learn how monitoring happens, we are so happy to have you. And there is always opportunity as well to provide input from the community on our IWMP, our Integrated Watershed Management Plan. And that's really an opportunity to make a huge difference in how your watershed is managed and how to share your concerns about the environment. So you really could have a seat at the table working with stakeholders to give your input on how the watershed will be managed moving forward. And this last bit, we're always here to support you. That's our job, that's our goal, is to support people in making environmentally sound decisions on their land. So any questions, any concerns that you have, we are more than happy to hear them and to try and find you some solutions if that's what you're looking for. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for listening and for joining us at this open house. If you have any questions, please contact me. I'm more than happy to speak with you. My email is on the screen there, and our phone number, our office phone number as well. I really hope you learned something and you feel inspired by the way we manage to get involved and to share your views and incorporate some of these opportunities into your life. So once again, thank you so much. I hope you have a great evening.